Have you ever felt like you're being watched in the woods? That strange feeling when the birds go quiet and the shadows seem to move on their own. I never used to believe in such things until I found my grandfather's journal. Welcome back to the OBSCURALORE Vault. Tonight's story will take you deep into the hidden hollows of Appalachia, where ancient secrets lurk in the mist-shrouded mountains. What I'm about to share with you, I've never told anyone before. Part of me hopes it's just the ramblings of a man driven mad by isolation, but deep down I know better. This is the story of my grandfather's encounters with what he called the mountain people of Appalachia and the ancient horror they serve. Part 1. The Inheritance. Last October, my mother called to tell me Grandpa Elijah had passed away. I hadn't seen him in nearly 15 years, not since I was a boy. He lived alone in an old cabin up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, miles from the nearest neighbor. People in town called him a hermit, a recluse with strange ideas. My mother had tried to maintain a relationship, but his paranoia drove everyone away eventually. What surprised me was that he'd left the cabin to me in his will. "Why me?" I asked my mother over the phone. "You were the only one he ever connected with," she said. "He used to say you had the sight, like him. I remembered how he'd take me hunting when I was young, pointing out tracks and signs I couldn't see. 'There,' he'd whisper. 'They've been here.' I never knew who they were. 3 days later, I was driving up winding mountain roads as a storm rolled in. The GPS lost signal miles back, and the directions from the local gas station attendant were vague at best. 'Just follow Black Hollow Road till it ends, then take the dirt path up another mile or so,' he'd said, not meeting my eyes. 'Ain't been up there in years, not since—' He didn't finish the sentence. As I drove deeper into the mountains, the trees grew denser, closing in around the narrow road like gnarled fingers. Twilight came early under their canopy. By the time I spotted the weathered mailbox marked Faro, darkness had nearly fallen. The cabin sat in a small clearing, its windows dark and shuttered. It was bigger than I remembered. 2 stories of rough-hewn timber that had grayed with age. The porch sagged slightly, and vines crept up one side, but otherwise it seemed solid enough. The key turned easily in the lock. Inside, the air was stale and cold. I fumbled for a light switch, but nothing happened. "Generator's probably dead," I muttered to myself. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate through the front room. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, but otherwise untouched, as if my grandfather had just stepped out moments ago and would return any minute. In the kitchen, I found an old oil lamp and matches. The warm glow cast long shadows as I explored. The cabin was a time capsule. No internet, no TV, just shelves of books, handmade furniture, and the tools of a man who lived off the land. The living room walls were covered with maps of the surrounding mountains, marked with strange symbols in red ink. In some places, the markings were so dense they almost formed patterns, spirals and curves that hurt my eyes if I looked too long. Upstairs, I found my grandfather's bedroom. A large desk stood by the window, piled high with notebooks, loose papers, and old leather-bound books. Above it hung a large map with more of the strange markings connected by red thread pinned to the wall. I picked up one of the notebooks. The date on the first page was from 30 years ago. My grandfather's handwriting filled every inch of the page, tight, urgent scrawls that sometimes dug into the paper. August 14th, 1992. I've seen them again, closer this time. They don't know I was watching. I counted 7 moving through the trees near Stillwater Creek. Their gait is wrong, too fluid, like they have extra joints. They carried something wrapped in hide. It was moving. October 3rd, 1992. Found strange markings carved into the trees in a perfect circle, half a mile in diameter. At the center, a deer splayed open, insides arranged in that same spiral pattern, not the work of any animal, too precise, too deliberate. I flipped through more pages, a chill creeping up my spine. My grandfather had been documenting what he called the mountain people for decades. His entries became more frequent, more detailed over time. He included crude sketches, elongated figures with too many limbs, strange symbols carved into trees and rocks. March 17th, 1993. I followed them. God help me. I followed them. They went to the old mining cave at Devil's Backbone. I couldn't bring myself to go inside, but I heard the chanting, words no human throat should make. When they emerged hours later, they looked fed. Their movements were quicker, more jerky, like puppets on invisible strings. As I read on, the storm outside intensified. Wind howled around the eaves of the cabin, and rain lashed against the windows. I nearly jumped out of my skin when something heavy thudded against the roof. Just a branch, I told myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. The next notebook was newer, dated just a few years ago. My grandfather's handwriting had changed, more frantic, less orderly. Entire pages were filled with the strange symbols I'd seen on his maps. And then I found it, a thick, leather-bound journal with a simple title page, The Truth About the Mountain People, by Elijah Farrow. Part 2. The journal begins. What I'm about to share comes directly from my grandfather's journal. I've spent months trying to verify his claims, researching local history, and even revisiting some of the locations he mentioned. What I found, what I saw, I still can't explain. The journal began with an entry dated April 4th, 1975. I came to these mountains to escape, to find peace after what I saw in Vietnam. The locals warned me about buying this property. Bad land, they said. Strange things happen on that ridge. I ignored them. City folk have always made up stories about mountain people. Ignorant, inbred, dangerous. I thought it was just more of the same. I was wrong. They aren't human, not entirely. I caught glimpses at first, movement in my peripheral vision, footprints too narrow and deep to be a man's, strange calls in the night that made my dogs whimper and hide. I started asking questions in town. Most folks clammed up immediately. But Jed Holcomb, old-timer at the general store, had been drinking Shine and got loose-lipped. "Those ain't just stories," he whispered. "My granddaddy called them the Hollow Ones, said they've been here longer than us, said they serve something ancient that sleeps under the mountains." The next several entries documented my grandfather's research into local folklore and history. He found patterns in disappearances going back centuries. Trappers, hunters, hikers who ventured too deep into certain valleys never returned. Every few decades, entire families would vanish overnight, their homes found empty with meals still on tables. Native American tribes had avoided specific areas of these mountains. Early settlers recorded encounters with strange folk who moved wrong and spoke with mouths that opened too wide. December 12, 1975. I found cave paintings today while hunting near Black Rock Ridge. They're hidden behind a fall of rocks, probably undisturbed for centuries. The images show tall, thin figures surrounding a massive shape, something with too many limbs radiating from a central mass. The figures are bowing, offering what look like human sacrifices. The dating on the paint suggests they're over 8,000 years old. These mountain people have been here long before European settlement, before the Cherokee, maybe before any humans. My grandfather's entries became more detailed as he documented actual encounters. May 30th, 1976. I saw one clearly today. It was drinking from the creek at dawn. From a distance it looked like a tall, gaunt man, but through my rifle scope I could see the truth. Its skin was grey-white, stretched too tight over its frame. Its joints bent backward, and its fingers were too long, with an extra knuckle in each. When it turned its head, its neck twisted farther than humanly possible. It looked up suddenly, directly at me, though I was hidden and downwind. Its eyes were huge, black, with no whites. Its mouth opened in what might have been a smile, revealing teeth like needles. I didn't shoot. Something told me it wouldn't have mattered. The journal continued with increasing urgency. My grandfather began mapping their movements, identifying gathering places, documenting their strange behaviors. He found evidence of rituals, circles of stones arranged in precise geometric patterns, animal remains positioned to form symbols visible only from above. November 2nd, 1976. I've discovered they have a language. It's unlike anything I've ever heard. Clicks and hums that vibrate in my chest when I hear them from a distance. I've been recording them when possible and trying to decipher patterns. They communicate with symbols too, markings carved into trees and rocks. I'm copying them into this journal, though it gives me headaches to reproduce them exactly. The next pages contained my grandfather's attempts to transcribe their language, bizarre symbols that seemed to shift and move if I stared at them too long. I quickly turned the page, feeling nauseated. February 18th, 1977. I found their settlement today, deep in a valley that doesn't appear on any map, hidden by a peculiar mist that never seems to lift. Their structures are wrong, built at impossible angles that hurt my eyes to look at directly. They're made of stone, wood, and something else, a material that seems to pulse slightly like it's breathing. I counted at least 30 of them moving around the settlement. Some looked almost human. Others, God help me, others were clearly in the process of transformation. Their limbs elongated, skin translucent, movements becoming that unnatural fluid grace. And in the center of their settlement stands a stone altar. Above it hangs something I can only describe as a tear in the air itself, a vertical split in reality through which I glimpsed something else. Another place that isn't a place at all, but a churning mass of colors that shouldn't exist. Part 3. The Ancient One Beneath. My hands were shaking by this point. Outside, the storm had reached its peak. Lightning flashed so frequently it was like a strobe light, casting the room in stuttering illumination. I should have stopped reading, should have packed up and left that cabin immediately. But I couldn't. Something compelled me to continue. September 3rd, 1977. I've learned what they worship. The locals have legends about it. They call it the sleeper under the mountain, or the old one below. In their myths, it came from the stars long before humans walked the earth. The mountain people were once human generations ago, people who heard the call, who went into the deep woods and never returned, at least not as themselves. The transformation takes years. First, they hear the voice, dreams of whispers that make perfect sense while sleeping, but can't be remembered when awake. Then come the changes. Physical at first. Longer limbs, heightened senses, a hunger for raw meat. Then mental. Memories of their past lives fade, replaced by knowledge they shouldn't have. Knowledge of stars and geometries and the thin places between worlds. Eventually, they aren't human at all anymore. December 21st, 1977, winter solstice. Tonight they performed their most important ritual. I watched from the ridge above as hundreds of them gathered in the valley. They came from all directions, more than I ever imagined existed. They formed concentric circles around the altar and began to move, a hypnotic, swaying dance that made me dizzy just watching. The tier above the altar widened as they danced. Through it, I saw tentacles the size of ancient redwoods sliding against each other. A massive eye opened, larger than a house, with a pupil that swirled like a galaxy. They were feeding it. Each approached the tear and cut their palm, letting black blood drip into the opening. With each offering, the tear widened, and more of the thing beyond became visible. What I saw next will haunt me forever. A portion of the thing pushed through, a limb or appendage I have no words to describe. It touched the forehead of each worshipper in turn. As it did, their bodies contorted, evolving further away from humanity. I believe what sleeps beneath these mountains is neither God nor demon, but something older than both concepts. Something from beyond our universe that fell to Earth eons ago and burrowed deep into the planet's crust. The mountain people are its servants, its eyes and ears in our world. It changes them, uses them, speaks through them, and it's growing stronger. The journal entries continued for years. My grandfather documented more encounters, more rituals. He began to understand their hieroglyphics, their crude calendar system based on stellar alignments. He mapped the network of caves that honeycombed the mountains, leading to what he believed was the chamber where the Ancient One rested. But as his knowledge grew, so did his paranoia. He became convinced they knew he was watching them, that they could sense his presence, perhaps even read his thoughts from a distance. July 7th, 1983. They left a sign for me today, a circle of those strange white flowers that only grow near their settlements, arranged perfectly around my cabin while I slept. In the center, a deer's heart, still warm. They're inviting me, calling me to join them. Sometimes I hear the whispers now when I sleep, words I don't understand but somehow comprehend, promises of knowledge, of transformation, of becoming something more than human. God help me, some nights it sounds beautiful. Part 4. The Descent. The next section of the journal detailed my grandfather's increasingly desperate attempts to protect himself. He carved counter-symbols into the trees surrounding his property. He hung charms made of bone and iron nails above every door and window. He rarely slept, kept weapons close at hand, but the entries also showed a terrible fascination growing within him. He began to record his dreams, visions of vast underground spaces where something massive stirred in the darkness. He wrote of voices that called his name, of knowledge flooding his mind upon waking. April 30th, 1985. I found myself at the edge of their valley today, with no memory of walking there. 4 hours missing from my day. When I returned home, my boots were caked with a black mud that doesn't come from any part of these mountains, I know. My joints ache. My skin feels too tight. When I look in the mirror, my eyes seem darker somehow. I need to leave this place, but I can't, not yet, not until I understand. The entries grew more sporadic after that. Weeks, sometimes months, passed between them. When my grandfather did write, his handwriting had changed. More angular, the letters connecting in strange ways. November 11th, 1986. I followed the maps to the deepest cave today, the one they call the throat of the mountain in their language. I shouldn't have gone alone, shouldn't have gone at all, but I had to see. The cave descends for miles, twisting in ways that defy normal geometry. Passages that should lead up somehow go down, tunnels that should connect don't, while walls that appear solid can be walked through if approached from the correct angle. I reached a chamber larger than a cathedral. Stalactites hung like teeth from the ceiling. The walls pulsed with a faint bioluminescence, a blue-green glow that seemed to follow my movements. In the center of the chamber stood a pillar of black stone that wasn't stone at all. It twisted slowly, though there was no wind. Parts of it seemed to phase in and out of existence. I understood then. What sleeps beneath the mountain isn't fully in our dimension. Most of it exists elsewhere, with only a small portion anchored to our reality through this pillar. As I watched, the pillar rippled. A pattern of circles and lines appeared on its surface, a message. I understood it immediately, though I don't know how. "You are ready. Join us." I ran. God help me. I ran faster than I've ever moved in my life. I felt the tunnel shifting behind me, trying to redirect me back to that chamber. Only my mappings saved me, but part of me wants to return. The entries became increasingly disturbing. My grandfather documented physical changes, joints that popped and relocated temporarily, heightened night vision, a distaste for cooked food. He could hear whispers from miles away, could sense the mountain people moving in the forest without seeing them. He was changing. February 3rd, 1990. I cut my hand chopping wood today. The blood was darker than it should be, almost black in the right light. The wound closed within hours. I'm not afraid anymore. That's the strangest part. I should be terrified of what's happening to me. Instead, I feel curious, eager even. But I maintain my vigil. I document everything, hoping someone will find this journal someday, will understand what exists here in these ancient mountains. The mountain people avoid my cabin now. They know I'm fighting the change, resisting the call. They'll wait. They have patience, measured in centuries. The journal's final section spanned the last 30 years. My grandfather described a constant battle within himself, fighting the transformation while simultaneously being drawn to the knowledge it offered. He began to understand their purpose. The Ancient One was not merely sleeping, but healing, gathering strength. The mountain people were preparing for its awakening, an event they had been working toward for thousands of years. May 17th, 2015. The stars are aligning. I've checked the calculations repeatedly. The configuration they've waited for approaches, when the gate between dimensions will be at its thinnest, when the Ancient One can finally emerge fully into our world. The date, October 31st, 2025. They're preparing. More humans are disappearing from surrounding towns. More transformations are underway. They need numbers for what's coming. I've held out for decades, but my resistance weakens. My body is no longer fully human, though I can still pass among normal people if I'm careful. I bind my elongated fingers, wear tinted glasses to hide my eyes, avoid speaking as my voice now carries harmonics that make others uneasy. But my mind remains my own for now. I've sent for my grandson. He has the sight, as I once did. If anyone can continue this work, warn others, perhaps even find a way to stop what's coming, it's him. May God forgive me for drawing him into this. The final entry was dated just 1 week before my grandfather's death. October 7th, 2023. The cabin is prepared. All my research, all my maps and journals are arranged for him to find. The protective symbols are renewed. They should keep the mountain people at bay long enough for him to learn the truth. My time is almost up. The voice is constant now. My body betrays me further each day. This morning, I found myself standing at the edge of the forest with no memory of leaving my bed. My hands had formed the signs of summoning. I will end things my way before I lose the last of my humanity, before I become one of them completely. To my grandson, if you're reading this, burn these journals, leave this place, never return to these mountains. But if you cannot, if you feel drawn to understand as I did, then follow the maps I've left. See the truth with your own eyes, then decide. They're coming for you already. They can sense the same potential in your blood that they saw in mine. I'm sorry. The journal ended there. Part V. The Truth Revealed. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving an unnatural silence in its wake. Not even insects chirped in the darkness. It was madness, all of it. The ramblings of a man who'd spent too many years alone in the wilderness, whose mind had fractured under self-imposed isolation. And yet, I walked to the window and looked out at the forest surrounding the cabin. In the pale moonlight, everything seemed normal, peaceful even. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something at the tree line. A circle of pale flowers, perfectly arranged, that definitely hadn't been there when I arrived. Over the next few days, I pored over my grandfather's research, his maps, his recordings, his meticulous notes on the mountain people and their master beneath. I told myself I was organizing it all to take to authorities, or perhaps psychiatric professionals who could explain my grandfather's delusions. But deep down, I knew I was looking for proof, something to confirm or deny the impossible things he'd documented. On the third night, I found it. Among my grandfather's possessions was an old tape recorder. The cassette inside was labeled simply Evidence August 1998. I found a set of batteries and pressed play. Static filled the room, then my grandfather's voice, older than I remembered but recognizable. August 14th, 1998, midnight, new moon. I'm approximately half a mile from their gathering place. They don't know I'm recording. Silence followed, broken only by the sound of crickets and my grandfather's breathing. Then, something else. A rhythmic clicking, like dozens of tongues against teeth, a humming that seemed to vibrate through the recorder itself. Voices, if you could call them that, speaking in a language no human throat could produce. The recording continued for several minutes. The sounds grew louder, more numerous, as if a crowd was gathering. Then came a sound that made my blood freeze, a deep, resonant pulse that seemed to warp the very audio of the tape. With each pulse, the other sounds synchronized, creating a harmony that was both beautiful and profoundly wrong. My grandfather whispered on the tape, "The vessel is opening. They're communicating with what lies beyond." The pulsing intensified. The clicking and humming rose to a fever pitch. Then, silence. Absolute silence that lasted nearly a minute. When sound returned, it was a single voice. Not the clicks and hums from before, but words, English words spoken in a voice that contained too many tones at once, as if multiple throats were speaking in perfect unison.
Elijah Pharaoh, we feel your presence. Your resistance honors us, but it is futile. The time approaches. The stars align. Our master stirs. You will join us in witness to glory.
My grandfather's breathing quickened on the tape. He whispered, "How do you know my name?" The voice answered,
We know all who carry the blood, all who can hear the call. Your grandson will serve as you were meant to.
The tape ended with the sound of my grandfather running, branches breaking under his feet, his panicked breathing. I sat in stunned silence. They had known about me, decades ago, before I'd ever set foot in these mountains as an adult. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises outside the cabin, soft footsteps circling, strange calls in the distance. Once I thought I saw a face at the window, gaunt and pale, with eyes too large and dark. In the morning I decided to test a theory. Among my grandfather's papers was a map marking the location of the hidden valley where he'd witnessed the mountain people's settlement. According to his notes, it was about 5 miles from the cabin, reachable by an overgrown trail that branched off from the main hiking path. I told myself I would just go part of the way, just far enough to prove to myself this was all fiction, that no such valley existed. The trail was exactly where his map indicated, barely visible but there. As I followed it deeper into the forest, the vegetation changed subtly. The trees grew taller, their trunks twisted in subtle spirals. Fungi I'd never seen before clustered at their bases, pale white mushrooms with caps that seemed to pulse slightly when viewed from the corner of my eye. The air grew still. No birds sang, no squirrels rustled in the underbrush. After 3 hours of hiking, I reached a ridge overlooking a small valley. A strange mist hung over it, obscuring details, but I could make out structures, buildings constructed at odd angles that seemed to defy the laws of physics. I took out my phone to document what I was seeing, but it was dead, despite having been fully charged that morning. As I stood watching, the mist shifted, and I caught a glimpse of movement below. Tall, thin figures moving with that unnaturally fluid grace my grandfather had described. Too distant to see clearly, but clearly not normal human movement. I should have left immediately, should have run back to the cabin, packed my things, and never returned. Instead, I found myself taking the path down into the valley. Something pulled at me, a curiosity so intense it overshadowed my fear. With each step, I felt a pressure building in my head, like whispers just below the threshold of hearing. I was halfway down the slope when I came to my senses. A moment of clarity broke through the compelling force that had been drawing me forward. I turned and ran, scrambling back up the ridge, not stopping until I reached the main trail. I didn't slow down until the cabin came into view, hours later as dusk was falling. That night, the dreams began. I saw vast chambers beneath the mountains, tunnels that twisted in impossible geometries. The pillar of not quite stone my grandfather had described, pulsing with a rhythm like a massive heartbeat, and beyond it all, glimpses of something immense, something that existed in more dimensions than our minds can comprehend, folded somehow into the space beneath the Appalachian Mountains, ancient beyond reckoning, patient, hungry after eons of slumber. It spoke to me in the dream, not in words, but in concepts that unfolded in my mind like poisonous flowers. Join us. Evolve. Transcend. I woke drenched in sweat, my joints aching in a way they never had before. When I looked in the mirror, I could swear my eyes were darker than they'd been yesterday. Over the next week, I experienced everything my grandfather had documented in his early journal entries. Strange appetites, heightened senses, discomfort in bright light, dreams filled with knowledge I couldn't possibly possess, star charts of constellations that don't exist in our sky, mathematical equations that solved problems I didn't understand, glimpses of a language written in spirals and whirls. I knew then that everything in the journal was true. The mountain people were real. The ancient one beneath the mountains was real. And I, like my grandfather before me, was beginning to change. Which brings me to why I'm making this recording. According to my grandfather's research, the Ancient One is preparing to fully enter our dimension on October 31st, 2025. The mountain people, former humans transformed into its servants, are gathering in greater numbers. More disappearances are being reported in towns throughout the region, dismissed as people getting lost in the wilderness. I've spent months verifying what I can. The cave system my grandfather mapped exists, though park services have closed off the deepest sections for safety concerns. The symbols he documented can be found carved into trees and rocks throughout these mountains, though most hikers mistake them for vandalism. And the transformation, it continues. More slowly than I expected, but progressing nonetheless. I find myself drawn to the forest at night. My dreams are filled with the voice of the Ancient One, promising knowledge and evolution beyond human understanding. I've found others like me, people drawn to these mountains by dreams they can't explain. People with the same changes beginning in them. Some embrace it, others like me are fighting it. We've formed a group, researchers, investigators, those with the sight. We're documenting everything, sharing information, trying to find a way to stop what's coming. Because if my grandfather was right, if the Ancient One fully awakens and enters our world, it won't stop with the Appalachians. Its influence will spread. More humans will hear the call. More will transform. What begins in these ancient mountains will eventually engulf the world. I don't know if we can stop it. The mountain people have been preparing for centuries. The Ancient One has been influencing our world since before recorded history. But we have to try. I return to the cabin periodically to check my grandfather's wards and protections, to retrieve more of his research. Each time I find new circles of those pale flowers around the property, new signs they're watching me. Last week I found a deer heart on the porch steps, still warm, an invitation. My time may be limited. The changes are accelerating. There are moments when I look at my hands, and they don't look like my hands anymore. Times when I catch myself standing at the edge of the forest with no memory of how I got there. If you're hearing this and live anywhere near the Appalachian Mountains, particularly the Blue Ridge region of North Carolina, be vigilant. Watch for these signs. 1. Circles of white flowers with blue centers that grow nowhere else. 2. Trees carved with spiral patterns that seem to move when you're not looking directly at them. 3. The sound of clicking and humming in the forest at night. 4. Dreams of vast underground spaces and a voice promising transformation. Most importantly, if you feel drawn to certain areas of the mountains, places you've never been, but somehow know how to reach, resist that pull with everything you have. I'll continue documenting what I find, sharing what I learn, for as long as I remain myself. October 31st, 2025 approaches quickly. The mountain people are growing bolder, gathering in larger numbers. The Ancient One stirs in its partial slumber. I can feel its anticipation like a pressure building beneath the earth. Tonight, I'll venture back to the hidden valley. I've found references in my grandfather's later notes to a potential weakness, a ritual that might seal the Ancient One in its dimensional pocket permanently. It's dangerous. If caught by the mountain people, I have no illusions about what they'll do to me, but I have to try. If you don't hear from me again, if this is my final recording, remember what I've told you. Spread the word. Prepare. The mountain people have served their master for thousands of years. They believe its awakening will transform the world. They're right about that part, just not in the way humanity would survive. Conclusion. This recording was found on a memory card in an abandoned cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. The owner's whereabouts remain unknown. Local authorities report an unusual number of missing persons cases in the region over the past year. Strange pale flowers with blue centers have been reported growing in perfect circles throughout the area. October 31st, 2025 is 7 months away. Thank you for listening to the Obscuralore Vault. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe, like and share so others can discover these tales from the shadows. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. Have you ever experienced anything strange in the Appalachian Mountains? Ever felt watched while hiking through remote forests? Remember, some legends exist for a reason. Some warnings should be heeded. And if you ever find yourself drawn to certain places in the mountains, places you've never been but somehow know how to reach, turn back. Run. Don't look behind you. Sleep well if you can. The Obscuralore Vault will return with more horrors next week.